Colonial conquest was achieved by more than just the power of superior arms, military organization, political power, or economic wealth, as important as these things were. Colonialism was made possible and then sustained and strengthened as much by cultural technologies of rule as it was by the more obvious and brutal modes of conquest that first established power on foreign shores. Colonial knowledge both enabled conquest and was produced by it. Knowledge was what colonialism was all about. Cultural forms and societies classified as traditional were reconstructed and transformed by and through this knowledge, which created new categories and oppositions between colonizers and colonized. In India, the British entered a new world that they tried to comprehend by using their own forms of knowing and thinking. The first step of colonialization was to learn the languages of the native people. For the British, understanding and speaking Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit were all necessary to issue commands, collect taxes, maintain order, and to create other forms of knowledge about the people they were ruling. Some of the first institutions set up in India were educational classes teaching British officials the local languages. This knowledge allowed the British to control the indigenous people by classifying, categorizing, and binding the social world. The educational institutions set up by the British were also used to enlighten the Indians. The photo here shows Grant Medical College, one of the first medical institutions set up in Asia. The construction of this college was intended to better the medical care in India and educate the natives. An important step in colonialization for the British was modernizing the Indian people. In this second video, we see the prestigious Elphinstone College. Elphinstone College was set up for Indian students to learn the English language and other European studies. Due to their knowledge of colonialization and past experiences, the British realized that their assistance with India's social progress would alleviate some of the backlash. Taking control over the entire colony of India required a drastic change in the current government. The British looked at past practices of regimes that ruled India to develop a ruling practice of their own. In order to be able to create the highest optimal reconfiguration of Indian government, the British needed extensive knowledge of India's history and practices of Indian states. The British used creative intellectual ways to colonize the Indian people. An example of this is how the British appointed Indian men to serve as high-ranking police and military officials. Loyalty was going to sustain the British rule, and tactical moves like these were necessary in order to harness it. The picture here shows 4 Indian men serving under the British government as police officials. The man on the chair looks to be the leader of the squadron due to the fact that the other 3 men are waiting on him, plus he is dressed in nicer attire. The British used their knowledge of colonialization to embrace the colonized and use them as figures of authority to enforce laws against their own people. This caused a rift between the social classes of indigenous people and strengthened the British government. At the very surface of British colonialization, the knowledge to separate Indians into social classes was the foundation of success. Known as the caste system, the British wanted to break down the massive population of India so they could have a coherent understanding of the people they were ruling. The data collected from the census helped the British accurately place Indians into social classes. The caste system soon became more of a necessity for British rule and not so much for organization. The caste system was once used for spiritual status, but with the emergence of the British government, it began to take on a more political role. The photo shown here shows 2 Brahmin women feeling melancholy. The Brahmins were highly ranked in the caste system and had a fond relationship with the British, relative to the other castes. Many of the Brahmins were priests, teachers, and sometimes warriors. Gaining the loyalty of these Brahmins helped the British endure throughout the years in India. The strategy of the Spanish was vastly different from that of the British, but the power of knowledge was equally beneficial for the both of them. The Spaniards colonizing Mexico were after 2 things: gold and converts. They accumulated both by establishing new legal systems, one that pertained to Europeans and one for the native peoples. Additionally, they provided the Mexicans with a new language, a new religion, and new technologies. When the Spanish arrived on Mexican soil, they confronted the ancient Aztec Empire. Right away, the Spaniards instilled the Spanish language and the practice of Christianity into the native population. Both would have a major impact on the colony and be practiced for centuries. The Spanish also brought over advanced technologies, including machines and techniques. As seen in this photo, Mexican workers became very reliant on the machines brought over by the Spanish for a source of income. Even though the man does not look wealthy, his business seems to be able to provide him with the acceptable clothing. Like the British, the Spanish developed hierarchies based on wealth, culture, and skin color to distinguish rights and privileges. The first photo shows the highest ranking class. These were wealthy Spanish individuals and high-ranking Mexican government officials. The men in the photograph can be credited with the establishment of the derogatory legal systems in place and are the people that possessed the knowledge that is being discussed. This next photo shows a postcard of a proud mestiza woman standing in front of her buckets and her well. She is by no means considered low class, but it can be deduced that she is a laborer and faces the challenge to support herself and her family. In this final picture, we see one of the lowest classes in the hierarchy. The four women pictured have close to zero social privileges and are forever enslaved to poverty. These women are the Mexicans affected the most by the legal system set forth by the men mentioned in the previous photo. With the power of knowledge, the British and the Spanish were able to manipulate and coerce the internal feelings of the colonized, either it be by empowering them with responsibilities or suppressing them until they revolt. Both tactics were used in order to enhance the efficiency of colonization. Both colonizers left lasting impacts on their colonies. Languages, religions, technologies, styles of government, and social tendencies. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon for colonizers. Weapons, wealth, and men are vital for the quest of colonization, but serve useless if the brainpower behind them is stagnant.